So what has caused this doubling, basically, of our life expectancy over a fairly short period of time? I mean, 125 years. And her answer kind of surprised me, and one of the other CEOs sitting next to me kind of nudged me a little bit. Kind of. I mean, she said, obviously there's been tremendous advances in medical science, and that's a big component of it. But she said one of the big components that people don't think about, and I didn't prompt her with this. I'd never met her. But she said, is the commercial collection of trash.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Next, the podcast about the people
and trends
that are shaping the future of business. I'm Diane Brady.
And I'm Kristen Stoller.
And this week we are talking about waste.
Yes, everyone's favorite subject on this very hot New York City day is the trash smell wafts up to us.
Especially lower Manhattan, where there are hundreds of garbage bags on garbage day.
Yeah.
Waste management, which, by the way, much like Kentucky Fried Chicken, is now known by only its acronyms, WM.
WM. They wanted to make a big sustainability rebrand. They're all about recycling, which, by the way, I have a ton of European, British, Irish neighbors in my building, and they make fun of me so much because of how I use paper towels. I don't use the plastic. I use the plastic soap containers.
The British are big recyclers?
Yeah, apparently. They get so mad and they say Americans are so wasteful. You don't recycle.
We are. We are pretty wasteful. I will say it's a continuum. Having lived in parts of Asia like India, parts of Africa where I'd say they're less advanced on the trash collection front. And then Europe, where you have to pay like $2-3 for one trash bag, it really makes you think about how much you put out. So
Smart.
I do think we don't have enough financial incentive to reduce.
Yeah.
We have some incentive to recycle, not much to reuse unless you're a Depression era baby.
Not really, but I guess that brings us to our CEO, Jim Fish of
Jim
WM.
Fish. Have we not mentioned Jim Fish yet? Because Jim Fish is the heart and soul of WM. He's been there since 2001.
Yeah, and he has a very interesting job because part of the thing that I think is so interesting about Jim is his workforce. He has to deal with people who this is obviously, or maybe not, their first choice of a job. It's a dirty job. It's hard to be on the back of those trucks.
It's unsafe.
Yeah.
In some cases.
How do you keep people? How do you keep an aging workforce in this profession?
Yeah, I think technology is going to be interesting. He does tend to cite Herb Kelleher of Southwest as being one of his inspirations for a people-first mentality. And some of those people, 50% of them do go from jobs for very good reasons. They're back-breaking jobs. And so how he does that.
Absolutely.
And of course, I'm fascinated. What does Jim find in the trash?
Yeah, that's my biggest question. He has to have some good stories for us.
I'm sure he does, and we'll be right back with Jim Fish. Cities are home to the majority of the world's population and account for 80% of global GDP. That makes the health and sustainability of our cities critical to creating a prosperous future. And of course, business has a role to play. Jason Gerzadis, the CEO of Deloitte US, is the sponsor of this podcast, and he joins us now. Jason, great to see you.
Great to see you, Diane. Thanks for having me.
So how should businesses play a role in creating more vibrant and sustainable cities?
It's clear to me that the health of cities is inextricably linked to businesses' viability and success. I think it starts with an awareness or a recognition of that mutually dependent reality. I think the how is around collaboration. It's bringing to bear the capabilities of businesses to support cities' renewal and innovation, to understand the criticality of cities' role around economic prosperity, innovation, as well as cultural exchange.
Jason, could you give us some examples of successful urban transformation projects that have been driven by these innovative business practices?
I'm proud to say that Deloitte, back in 2023, we started an effort called YesSF here in San Francisco, where I live. The launch of YesSF with other business collaborators has brought together our competencies around stimulating interest amongst innovators to bring sustainability and technology innovation to benefit the city itself.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like a very cool project. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. So, Jim, I couldn't help but notice that we should be saying WM instead of waste management, much like KFC with Kentucky Fried Chicken. So I have to ask, why? Is there a reason why? Is it partly to say something about that you're more than just waste management, or why are we now calling you WM?
I think you nailed it.
Is that it?
End of the answer.
Enough said?
Wow.
No,
All right, end the interview right here.
Well, I'll tell you where it came from. We have a sustainability forum every year that's held in conjunction with a golf tournament in Phoenix.
You're a golfer.
I'm a golfer. Yeah, that's maybe a little bit of a stretch, but I enjoy it. But one of our guests said, you call yourself waste management, and I understand that's been the waste management since you were founded, but you're becoming more of a sustainability company. And this whole golf tournament is focused around sustainability. It's been zero waste now for 12 years, I think, and not an easy task, by the way, to make a big event like that, zero waste. So she said, why not call it WM? And she said it might be heresy to suggest that, but why not call it WM to take the waste out of the the name of the company? And so we thought about it, and our marketing team said, that's actually a pretty good idea. It takes a while to get to kind of catch hold. I think when United Parcel Service changed to UPS, my parents called it United Parcel Service forever, but eventually we all know it now as UPS.
Well, recycling is a form of waste management, isn't it? In essence,
it is.
But you're right. You've got the energy. You've got a lot of different businesses sort of stemming from your core business that are much more than waste management. Do you want to give us a broad sense of what you do?
Sure. We do collect waste. And we dispose of it. And of course, recycling is a big and profitable part of our business as well. So those are the two primary components. And then you can break it down further into the segments of waste. We have commercial waste, we have industrial waste, and we have residential waste. Most people think about this company as a residential waste company because that's when we see them. We see them at our house picking up our recycling or our trash. But a big piece of our business is commercial, which are the CVSs that I walked to this morning. Although we're not servicing that CVS, but we do service CVSs around the country. So that's more commercial waste, and then industrial waste is typically the big ExxonMobils and Marathons and companies like that at their refineries. So that's the industrial waste segment.
Where are the biggest areas you operate? Because I know New York, you said, isn't one that you operate.
Well, New York is big for us, but not on the collection side. Okay. So that's the other.
We're not going to blame you for all the trash on the streets this time of year.
Yeah. Can't blame us for the trash on the street.
Okay. No. Yeah. The trash smell is not Jim's fault.
It is not. No. But so we do have a big business in New York, and it's kind of the disposal side, and disposal comes in several different forms. It can come in the form of a recycle plant. It can come in the form of a landfill, and it can come in form of a transfer station. And a transfer station effectively takes the waste. It ends up on a concrete floor, and then it's loaded into some type of vehicle. It can be a train, as is the case here in New York. It can be a barge, is also the case here in New York, or it can be a truck. So New York has all three kinds. Most of our transfer stations are truck transfers. So it gets loaded into a big 18-wheeler, and that 18-wheeler goes a fairly long distance, typically to a landfill.
Mm. And now, Diane brought up the good point about WM and your rebrand to sustainability. And I feel like it's really like a lot of companies right now are leaning into this sustainability push. For a lot of companies, it's a lot of marketing. They want to do good for the planet, but also be able to tell their shareholders and customers that they are. But for you, it's kind of like not a new business line, but a important business line. I'm wondering, are there any times you had to make a trade-off between like profitability and sustainability, and how do you weigh those?
I would tell you that if you think about those lines of business I just went through, commercial and industrial and landfill and transfer station, the second highest return on invested capital for us of all those lines of business is our recycling line of business. Mm-hmm. And so some people do make the mistake of assuming that, well, when times are tough, you're going to throw it in the trash because it makes more money at the landfill than it does going through a recycle center.
Doesn't weigh much.
And recycling doesn't. Glass does, but a lot of recyclables don't weigh that much. But landfill is not the number one, by the way. The highest return on invested capital for us is the commercial line of business. And then second highest is our recycling line of business. So if I were completely agnostic about the environment, which I'm not, but if I were, I would make the financial decision every time to send it to a recycle center where I can versus a landfill. So I think it's something that is a little bit misunderstood about recycling. It's a very good business for us. It's not just that we want to be good kind of partners with the earth and good stewards of the environment. But we also are our shareholder is important to us, and hence the fact that that sustainability and financial returns go together is important.
I'm not sure if you have your golf tournament on a landfill, but I've always been fascinated by the fact that landfills can actually generate energy, right? Because of the gas that is produced. Yep. I talk a little bit about, is that actually a line of business that is lucrative for you, or is it just a good thing to do? I'm obviously, I don't want to say pennies on the dollar, but given the amount of landfill in the U.S., how much can we be relying on that as a source of energy going forward?
Well, it is profitable for us. And I think every one of these lines of business, we are looking at it both, whether it's regardless of whether there's something good that comes out of it environmentally, we're also looking at it as a profit center for us. I think Jamie Dimon said, if you're in the sustainability business and you don't care about your financials, then you're in the wrong business. And I think he's right about that. We're in the sustainability business, but we do care also about the returns on those investments. And when you think about landfills producing gas, they naturally produce gas because the trash decomposes. And probably for 20 years, we've been turning that gas into electricity. Most of our landfills have some type of landfill gas to energy, whether it's landfill gas to electricity through a big generator set, or now landfill gas to renewable natural gas. And part of the beauty of that is that our fleet of trucks, and we have 20-ish, a little bit more, 1,000 heavy trucks, and about 75% of those are natural gas. They run on CNG. And so, in effect, you create a full circle because you take trash and you pick it up in a CNG truck and you take it to a landfill and it decomposes and turns into gas, and we clean it up because the gas that comes out of the landfill has some constituents in it that aren't good for the truck engine. So we clean that gas up. Some of it gets put on the pipeline and some of it actually goes directly into the tank of that CNG truck. So it truly is a full circle for us.
Are we running out of landfill space? Like what's the future of that?
Landfills do have a finite life to them.
Yeah.
And in the next 15 years, and we'll present this at our Investor Day, in the next 15 years, there's about 400 landfills out of a total of 2,000 in the United States that will come offline. And so the question is, how do you replace those? Yeah. And part of our strategy that really separates us from the other guys is that we're better at replacing those. B, we have longer life than the average. C, we've really made an effort to divert a lot of material away from landfills to recycle centers, and hence the big investments that we've made in these recycle centers that make them more efficient. So there's a number of ways that, and then you can also develop alternative form of transportation. We're building rail lines to run for example, from Miami up to Central Florida, and we have a landfill in Central Florida that has, 100 years of life left. The Miami landfill only has about 10 years of life left. So now we're expanding that landfill, and we've bought a piece of adjacent property. But so that'll help. But at the same time, we are moving some of that waste either to a recycle center where we can, or putting it on this newly developed rail line and moving it up to
For us non-trash people, how do you replace a landfill? What does that mean?
Well, you don't really replace. It's because it's a finite amount of space.
Right.
The only way to really replace it, once it gets to a full capacity, and it typically is full. Some landfills, a small number of landfills, fill up based on time. So, you have X number of years to fill this landfill, and then you're done. Most landfills fill up based on capacity, and so you have X number of tons that can go into that landfill, and once you get to that amount, then that landfill is done. It's closed, and you have to go through a closure process. And so the only way to replace that is to find either another site or another mode of disposal. We owned some of the incinerator plants, and we sold those in 2014, and that is another mode of disposal. And there are some other companies that still do that today. Those are hard to get replaced, harder to get replaced than a landfill, because
doesn't sound good for the environment. How are incinerators generally?
I mean, in Europe, they're more heavily used because they have less land in Europe. I think incinerators have done a good job of reducing their emissions. Again, we're not in that business anywhere, so I'm probably a walking commercial for my competitors here. But I think the incinerator business is a much cleaner business than it ever was. It used to be when they were initially built in the 70s that they weren't the emissions weren't as
just
clean.
Toss it all in there and off it goes.
Right. Today, I think those incinerators are much cleaner than they used to be.
Well, as you're talking, I think about personal culpability when it comes to trash. I feel a slight bit of guilt when I see those barges go by, and I know you've spent time, on the back of trucks in Pittsburgh and such. So, I mean, give me a sense when you see, how much do you think your customers take responsibility for the amount of trash they produce? Because you mentioned Europe. That's a place where you have to pay a lot of money in Switzerland, for example, for garbage bags. It's very expensive to put out your garbage. Here, it's really not. And what do you think about the reduce part of the equation?
I think it's part of our responsibility to. I'm kind of my wife gives me a hard time when we go to a baseball game or whatever, and I see a Dasani water bottle in the trash bin. I'm picking it out of there, and she's like, "Are you kidding me? What are you doing?" And I said, "It doesn't go there. It goes over here." So I'm pretty particular about making sure that what goes in the recycle bin actually is in the bin. Even at our house, we have two girls, 22 and 20, and they're pretty good about it too. But sometimes something ends up in our trash can that should go in the recycle bin. So I think we all have a responsibility there. I will say this about trash, though, and I saw an interesting presentation at the Business Council. I sit on the Business Council, and so the speaker was she was from Stanford University, and she was talking not about trash, but she was talking about healthcare and why healthcare is so much better today than it was 100 years ago, and why the average age. So we'll all live to be an average of, I think the average for all of us, maybe women is a little bit older than men, but 82, 83, something like that is kind of our life expectancy. And in 1900, it was 45,
30s,
40, 45, something like that. And so the question was asked of her, so what has caused this doubling, basically, of our life expectancy over a fairly short period of time? I mean, 125 years. And her answer kind of surprised me. And one of the other CEOs sitting next to me kind of nudged me a little bit. Kind of. I mean, she said, obviously there's been tremendous advances in medical science, and that's a big component of it. But she said, one of the big components that people don't think about, and I didn't prompt her with this. I'd never met her. But she said, is the commercial collection of trash. So since you lived in India, you understand this.
Yeah.
You walk around Mumbai, and the Dharavi slum, which I've walked through a couple times, and the trash, you think about the trash being dumped on the curb here. I mean, yes, it gets dumped on the curb daily, but then it gets collected daily. But the trash is just thrown out in the street, and
it's like Shakespearean almost.
It is like Shakespearean, and so that's maybe a kind of a good time period to associate that with. I mean, you think about the bubonic plague, and what ultimately caused that was waste, and rats kind of gravitate to it. And if you walk around Mumbai and in the Dharavi, I mean, there are rats all over the place, and so that is and that was her point, was the commercial collection of trash didn't really happen in this country until probably 1900. And then ultimately, the guy who was the founder of Waste Management, a guy named Wayne Huizenga, his grandfather, his name was Harm Huizenga, and he came over from Poland and started a commercial trash collection business in Chicago in 1910 or something. And he had a horse-drawn cart, and he would draw that cart around the streets and pick up trash, and then probably take it someplace and dump it in the ground or whatever, which isn't great today, but it was better than it sitting there on a street. And to me, that was a really interesting factoid that I hadn't heard before, that a big component of the health of our society is a function of
you never think about that.
Trash.
Yeah. And unleaded gas and cleaning up our rivers and waterways.
We all remember you probably don't. You're young, but you're young too. But
I know. I remember all those commercials.
The commercials, that's in the 1970s, with the guy with a tear running down his
Oh,
face.
the native.
All right, I got to look that up.
The Native American guy who, and
It's like the Coke commercial moves you to tears.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So you mentioned India. Are you doing any work there? Any other places
we have
around the world?
1,500 employees in India, but they're
Okay.
they're back office employees. We're not doing frontline operations in India. We've thought about it. We've been asked to do it. It's not that uncommon for us to be asked. I get emails probably once a month from places around the world saying, "Can you come help us?"
Why do you say no? Like you said no to New York residential trash. I'm not going to, feel free to mention that. But what makes you say no to a particular market?
Well, some of it's logistics. Going to Bangladesh. I mean, I'm sure they have. I've never been there, but I'm sure they have a problem just like parts of India do as well. But we have a lot on our plates in Canada and the United States, and then a small piece in Europe. So we could do that, but I think part of it is just getting out of our skis a little bit. It's not that we don't care about those places around the world. I mean, we can talk about people. One of my single biggest focus is on people.
Your own people. Yeah, you quote Herb Kelleher in the past. I've heard you say is, why are they your most important stakeholder?
Well, and I'll quote Herb again here. I mean, he said, and he wrote that kind of crazy book called Nuts, and it's a book that I've read several times.
Southwest Airlines, for those who don't know, yep.
Yeah, and I never met Herb Kelleher, but in the book he talked about the constituents and in what order they are most important. And I think Southwest has always had really good customer service, and so I think people would have thought that he would put customer first. And you always hear that, well, it's always customer first. But his point was you put your employees first and you treat them as they, it's kind of the golden rule, do unto others, you would have them do unto you. And you treat them that way. And if they feel valued, they feel included, they feel like their opinions matter, they feel like it's a place they want to make their careers. If they feel that good about working for that company, then in turn, they will make the customer feel good. And if the customer feels good, if the customer's happy, then ultimately your shareholders are happy. And his point was, it has to be in that order. You can't get them out of order. I gave that answer one time to a group of shareholders, and they looked at me like I was crazy. What? I'm third in line here?
No,
I mean,
you're
what are you
fifth.
talking about? Yeah, exactly. And I always say, look, there's, we have two other constituents, at least at WM. I mean, we have our communities, and then we have the environment. And I always say the environment is kind of the voiceless constituent because it speaks in longer terms. And nobody, I get plenty of calls from customers saying, hey, what happened to my recycling pickup last week? The environment doesn't call me. They don't send me an email.
How are you feeling about that voiceless constituent these days?
Well, I think we always have room for improvement, but I think we've made tremendous strides just over the last, 30 years. Whether it's with automobiles, whether it's with trash collection, whether it's with recycling. I mean, we can do better, but I'm pretty optimistic that we've done pretty well. And you look at these rivers. I mean, even these rivers here around New York. I mean, I remember coming to New York. The first time I came here was with my family, and we took a vacation here. And gosh, the East River, I looked at the East River and thought, my gosh, I mean, look how horrible that East River is. And I think the commercial that we were talking about, I think he was on Lake Erie.
Yeah.
And it was, you could set it on fire, I think. And so I think we've done a lot of work as a society to improve the environment. Are we there? No. But are we better than we were? Yes.
I will say that I have kayaked in the East River, very unpopular, but my skin looks okay. So I think I'm okay right now.
Well, you didn't turn over, did you?
No, just a bunch of splashing.
Yeah,
so I think I'm okay.
I think you're okay.
But I feel like it's really unpopular right now to care about, the climate, sustainability, kind of like DEI. How do you convince people to care, to recycle, to do these things?
I don't know. I mean, I don't get that it's unpopular. I don't. From one, political party to another. I mean, I don't, I really, our business is very strongly focused on sustainability. I haven't changed my personal view on it. I mean, I have a personal view on politics, but that doesn't change my view of sustainability. It doesn't change my view of the environment. I mean, my view of the environment was really formed because my mom grew up in a very kind of beautiful place, which is Wyoming, and my dad grew up in Colorado. So two, kind of pretty states. And so every summer was just a station wagon. You remember it's like the Chevy Chase, wagon in
National Lampoon
National
Vacation.
Lampoon, yeah. Hers was a Chrysler Town and Country, and it had like wood paneling on it. So I grew up in Austin, Texas, but we would drive from Austin to Denver, and then we would drive from Denver to Casper to see both my parents' families. But you see places that are really incredibly beautiful. I mean, the Tetons and Yellowstone, and just unbelievable. So I always had this love for the environment and a hope that we could get better. And then at about the same time, we took that trip to New York, and I thought, gosh, it's filthy. And I think New York has done it's not Tokyo, but it has done a nice job of improving over a 50-year period.
Right. Nobody's saying drop dead or anything like that anymore. Tell me, what attracted you to the waste management business? You've been there since 2001. Was there something about the nature of the business or was it just the opportunity for advancement?
I just needed a job.
That's it.
I will tell you, it's kind of funny. I really had no idea, who waste management was. And so I got out of University of Chicago and I went to work for a guy named Maury Myers. I worked for him. I hadn't really spent much time with him previously, but he had the first company I worked for coming out of college was KPMG. And then I went to work for an airline that was it's no longer, but it was based in Phoenix. Airline got into trouble just like a lot of airlines do financially. And so a guy named Maury Myers came in and was CEO. And I didn't know Maury very well, but I went on to graduate school and left America West and went back to the University of Chicago. And Maury went on to run a company called Yellow Corporation, which is at the time was a LTL business, a trucking business. So afterwards, I spoke with him, and he said, "Why don't you come over and work for Yellow Corporation?" So I did in the finance group, and then he left pretty quickly. And Yellow consolidated, and so I ended up being out of a job, and so I was looking for work, and I reached out to him and said, hey, thanks for leaving as soon as I got to Yellow.
Thanks for nothing.
Yeah. So what do you have down I knew he'd gone down to waste management in Houston. And I said, what do you have down there? And he said, we're kind of restructuring a bit. We have a lot of open positions. Why don't you come down? And so I took a manager in financial planning position in Houston, and it was nice. My parents were, kind of down the street in Austin. And so I really didn't plan on working in this industry. It's not as if I said, I really want to do something for the environment, or I want to, I feel like this is a company that's pretty progressive, and I want to, work for that company. I just needed a paycheck. So
as a young boy, you weren't dreaming of trash.
What kept you there then? Maybe we should say that. Was there a role that you took on where you thought, this really, you fell in love with it?
I think when I eventually moved out into our field operations is when I said, okay, this company is doing a lot of good things. Because, in financial planning, I'm not to take anything away from that group. I mean, we have a financial planning group today. They do a fantastic job, but they're a corporate group typically, and so they're doing financial planning and analysis, and they're assessing acquisitions, and so you don't really get to see and feel the operations of the company. And so Maury and he retired in 2004, but I started asking him, what should I do? And he said, look, if you work for Procter & Gamble, which is a marketing company, you want to work in marketing at some point. If you work for Goldman Sachs, which is more of a finance company, you got to be in finance at some point if you're ultimately going to move.
Waste management, get on a garbage truck.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So waste management is an operating company. And he said, if you want to give yourself an opportunity to learn the business, then go out into our operations.
Get thee to Pittsburgh.
What'd you do? Well, did you actually get on a truck?
Oh, I did until about 3 years ago. I used to go out probably 2 times a year. And when I was in the field, I would do it probably once a month. Mm-hmm. But we moved actually from Houston to Boston, lived there for 2 years, then moved to Pittsburgh, and then Philadelphia, and then back to Houston. But I've always felt that my father-in-law, who was a pipe fitter in St. Louis, Missouri, and a union guy, and he and I were great friends, and unfortunately passed away too soon. But he said when I was going out to Boston, he said, look, are you union or labor or non-union? I said, we're union out there. And he said, well, look, there's no difference between union and non-union. They're all people. But he said, my advice to you is to, if they have some kind of meetings, because he said, is your office located on one of the work sites? And I said, no, it's in a kind of an office complex. Mm-hmm. He goes, well, then go out to those sites. And he said, do it every week. And he said, but if you do it just once, then don't do it at all, because then they'll say, yeah, okay, Jim came out here one time,
Right.
and we've never seen him again. But if you do it every week, then you'll earn the respect. And he said, boy, if you're unionized, you'll really earn the respect of the labor union guys.
Yeah. Oh, that was good
And
advice.
he said you'll earn the respect of the non-union guys too, but so I would go out and ride along on the back of a truck and throw trash with them, probably.
I don't know if
once a
I'd want
month.
my boss riding on the back of a truck as I'm
Well,
trying to do my
our
job.
board did
in
say,
Boston in the winter.
Once I became CEO, they said, probably you can ride around in the front, but I'm not sure I
Get
want
off
you
the
in the back.
back.
And most of our trucks now, we've transitioned away from
undercover
those
boss.
trucks where you have a helper on the back anyway.
Right. Okay.
For safety reasons.
Now, I want to rewind a little bit because you briefly mentioned your college experience, but I know you had quite a harrowing experience with your undergrad. Is that
I did, yeah.
correct? Can you tell us about that and what you learned from that experience?
So I started out at University of Texas growing up in Austin. I mean, I was a Longhorn and always had plans to go to UT. And so I got into UT and was going to an accounting major is kind of a 5-year program, not so much a 4-year. So in between year 3 and year 4, I went out to visit an aunt and uncle of my mom's, and she'd been kind of badgering me for a while. Why don't you go visit them? And so I did, and they were living in Scottsdale, and they were elderly. They were in their kind of maybe early 80s. So I went out to visit them in the summer, and I got out there and I started having these fairly quickly. I mean, within about a month, because I was going out there for the summer. So a month into it, I started having these really excruciating headaches, and I didn't know what it was about. And I'd never had migraines or anything like that. So I ended up going, they took me into the hospital, and what I had was fungal meningitis, which is a bad form of meningitis. All meningitis is not great for you, but this one was treated with a really strong antibiotic, and so I had to get these spinal taps with this big long needle right there in the base of the skull, so called a cisternal spinal tap, and I got that tap. I had 200 of them to purge this meningitis out of the system. So the interesting part, and the reason I ended up at Arizona State University actually, is because my mom came out and I did not want to go back. It was such a sensitive treatment. She said, "You want to come back to Austin and have a neurologist treat you?" And I literally cried, said, "No, I don't. I don't want to have anybody touch me." Even when this neurologist went on vacation.
So you were stuck in Arizona because of this meningitis?
Because of meningitis,
Wow.
yeah. And it took me 2 years to get over it. So 3 times a week, I would have a spinal tap, and I was completely out of it. I mean, they would give me that spinal tap. They'd give me a shot of Demerol, and I'd be knocked out for 8 hours. But the other 4 days a week, I didn't know a soul out there. My aunt and uncle are way up in North Scottsdale, and I was going to a hospital down in South Scottsdale. So my mom rented a small apartment. She had to come back to Austin because the rest of my sisters and my dad were back there. So I'm by myself, but we were trying to figure out before she left how would I get to that hospital, because it was a little bit away, and I wasn't going to walk. And so she, there was no such thing as Uber at the time, and I wasn't going to take a yellow cab because I was really pretty out of it after I got that spinal tap. So she called Arizona State University, and they said, "We have a van that's a handicap van that we will send over, and we'll take him from his apartment to the hospital and back. But the catch is he needs to be enrolled as a student." And so I enrolled as a student at Arizona State in their accounting program. And then for most of that time, they sent a teaching assistant over to my apartment to give me accounting classes and to finish my degree. So I finished my degree at ASU.
Wow. Is there anything you learned from that experience in that time that you've kind of taken with you into your leadership role today?
I think the main thing I learned from that was patience, because when we're all as when we're young, we're all impatient. And I think that's just human nature. And I was as impatient as anyone. And so when I first went into the hospital and the neurologist came in and said, "Well, here's the diagnosis. You have spinal meningitis. It's not a great form of meningitis. In fact, I was being treated with 3 other people, and 2 of the 3 of them passed away during the treatment. They just couldn't take that.
Were they young people too?
One of them was young. One of them was a little bit older.
Oh my God.
But that doctor came in and said, "You're going to have to." I had had my first spinal tap, which was not a pleasant experience, and he said, and I'm thinking, maybe I have to, I'll be over this in a month. I mean, I'll have to, maybe 4 or 5 spinal taps, but I can put up with it. And he said, you're going to have to go through this. We'll have to give you a spinal tap, and it'll probably be 3 to 4 times a week, and it'll take about 2 years to get rid of this. And I'm 21 at the time, and I'm thinking 2 years is like 10% of my life. I mean, I couldn't think. I mean, we talked about how people don't normally think far out. I mean, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for spring break. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do 2 years from now. And so I just had to learn patience. And so every single time I would go into that hospital, and by the way, when I would go in, I still to this day, when I smell that kind of alcohol pungent smell in a hospital, it still makes me nauseous because it was like Pavlov's dogs. I associated that smell with that treatment and the treatment I disliked.
I had a spinal tap once. I can't imagine having 200 of them. Yeah. That's crazy.
So I think what I learned from it most was patience. And look, things don't happen in your time frame all the time, and my time frame was not 2 years. I can tell you that.
Well, you mentioned you've got daughters, Gen Z, and what do you think of? Let's go back to the talent question. What attracts people now to WM? Since that's your most important constituent, what is it that you think gets them in the door?
I think, Nicole, our oldest, is going through an interview process right now. She wants to live and work in New York, and so she's going through an interview process. So I've had this conversation with her about what gets her in the door. And in addition to being well prepared when she goes in for the interview, I do think there's something to be said for your approach, and people tend to gravitate to people that are pleasant, have a pleasant expression on their face, and not everybody. I mean, not everybody has that. But I said, Nicole, even if you're not enjoying the interview, act like you're enjoying it. And so I've had some feedback on her and and the interview process that she's gone through, and she's done extremely well. And she's a smart young woman, but she does have this very pleasant demeanor about her. And I said, if you don't have that, it's a bit off-putting. And so sometimes when I don't do a lot of interviews, but I'm mostly looking for that type of people connection when I talk to folks. And by the way, it's not just the interview process. It's when I'm talking to someone at one of these business council meetings, for example. I mean, or any kind of social setting. I want to see, is there some type of, is this person kind of going to be
agreeable,
socially agreeable, and when I say agreeable, that doesn't mean they agree with points that I'm making, but they're both of y'all have a very pleasant demeanor, pleasant expression.
Job, right?
It's your day job, right?
No, but I get your point.
That's important, though.
I get your point. I mean, plus it's if you have a team, you want people to
be a culture fit.
Well, and I think it's important for me. I mean, I think it's important, maybe as important for me as anyone, because when I run into people in the elevator or in the offices, I always make a point of saying hello, and I always make a point of smiling, and I'm never too busy to, while I have a fairly busy schedule, I don't ever want to be so busy that I can't say hello to you. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to remember your name, and I'm not great with names, and I try, but
Diane and Kristen.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got Diane and Kristen, but
perfect.
But we have 62,000 employees, and many of them I've met multiple times, and sometimes their name sticks, and sometimes it doesn't. But I do think it's important, particularly for me, to demonstrate that. If I'm going to tell Nicole she should be that way, the dad should be that way.
Yeah. Speaking of people and culture, it just, of course, brings me to AI and the future of that on the workforce, because the workforce right now is facing so many challenges. We've got immigration reform, we've got an aging workforce. WM, said that you were going to eliminate 5,000 jobs through 2026 through automation. I'd love to hear about that journey and how you're looking at using AI, but also keeping that people first culture.
Yeah. Well, and that always, people do say that sounds counterintuitive if you're going to eliminate jobs, but you want to be people first. And by the way, those jobs that we eliminate are coming from attrition. So I'm not going and doing a reduction in force. Just not hire. When somebody leaves, if we're able, we just don't replace that position. And so that's how we're planning to eliminate 5,000 jobs. There's a couple of different places where we're doing that. One is, I've mentioned a couple of them. One is these trucks where we're moving from a traditional rear loader, which is the old style truck, and there's a person on the back, and that person is loading trash in the back. And I've been, as we've talked, I've been out there quite a few times on the back of those, and those can be pretty dangerous. I mean, we've had, in fact, what really prompted this whole interest for me to move away from those was not financial; it was safety. And we had a guy killed in East Texas, and there was a young woman who was texting and ran into the back of the truck while he was back there, and you don't survive that. And it was not the first time that's happened. And so I told the vice president, the area VP, look, we need to move away from those old style trucks. They're just too dangerous. And this was on a busy street in this town. It was on Martin Luther King Boulevard, which is a busy street in Port Arthur. And so the city said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll put a chase truck behind it, and that'll protect your people. And we'll do that for 6 weeks. And so they did. And literally the week after that chase truck dropped off, 7 weeks later, we didn't have somebody hurt, but another person, boom, hit the back of the truck. Fortunately, the helper was not back there. So I said, look, we have to move for safety purposes. I do not ever want to have somebody else hurt or worse yet, obviously killed behind a truck. So we're going to move away from those. And at the same time, you can imagine those positions are hard to fill. I mean, the 50% turnover.
It's a grueling job.
It's a tough job.
Yeah.
I mean, having been back there and done that, it's heavy, it's hot, or in the winter it's cold. I was back there one time when it was, I went out and it was 10 below zero on the back of a truck.
You're climbing over snowdrifts to
climbing
get
over
to...
snowdrifts. Your hands are cold. I mean, it's a hard job, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the folks that do it. But when they leave, and eventually they do, I mean, with 50% turnover, we've started to automate those trucks to the truck that has the arm on the side. And those don't require somebody behind the truck. In fact, they don't require anybody getting out of the truck. And the most dangerous place around those trucks is when you're outside of it. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the places where we're reducing headcount. And then also these recycle plants, we're automating them. And again, another position that is hard to fill are those pickers, they're sorters. They have a conveyor belt that's coming by pretty quickly. And so they're picking, 2x4s and things like that don't go through the recycle equipment off of the conveyor belt. And that can be done in an automated way more efficiently and produces a better product on the back end. It can handle a conveyor that's going faster, so we can it increases throughput. And at the same time, you have these jobs that are hard to fill when people leave, and people do leave them pretty regularly. So most of the positions that we're eliminating, and I don't like that word, but the positions that we're eliminating are positions that are hard to fill positions, difficult to hire for positions, and high turnover positions.
I think about most CEOs we speak to actually are looking at these reductions in workforce because of AI or other factors. And I think, where do you see the opportunities for the next generation as some of those on-ramps maybe close a bit? Or, the advice you have to your daughter, or what you would be doing if you were starting out now?
Well, I think the advice I would give is that, because there's always this concern about AI, and you hear a lot recently about AI. Oh my gosh, AI is going to eliminate all these jobs. But technology forever has eliminated jobs. I mean, there's not a job as far as I know that's a plow farmer anymore. So what happened to the plow farmer when tractors came around? Well, that plow, the plow operator who was doing it with a horse found something else to do. So technology does replace positions, but then they create positions.
I'm an optimist, but it feels different when you've got agentic. I think there will be jobs. It feels like there's going to be a transition period.
I'm sure there will be a transition period, but I'm not sure it's that much different than the Industrial Revolution, which was a massive change from an agrarian society to more of an industrial society. That I would argue that was a bigger change than AI will make today. Mm-hmm. And with that came a whole different type of job. I mean, a mechanic's job. There was no such thing really as a mechanic on a piece of machinery prior to the Industrial Revolution. So those are jobs that were created by technology. And I think the same will happen. I think you're right. I think there will be a transition period, but some of the jobs that Nicole's interviewing for are not jobs that would have been around in 1950.
Well, and the environment certainly is creating more jobs too,
I think
isn't
that's
it?
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's,
tech.
we were just a trash company in 1970, and now we're a trash and recycling company. So we have an entire division that's dedicated to sustainability that wasn't there, 30 or 40 years ago.
Is there some other arm of your business that's not happening right now besides trash and sustainability that you think will be the next big thing? And as we said, 2035?
I do think autonomy is real. I've got the app on my phone and the Waymo app, and so I've ridden in probably 5 or 6 different Waymos in Austin, Texas, in Phoenix, and I mean, they get out on the freeway and they drive to your exit and they get off and they drop you off at the restaurant, and it's pretty amazing. And there is nobody up front, and so those, but they do work. I know they're still working through a few. It's hard, I think, for Waymos to navigate snow-covered streets. So you don't see them in Minneapolis, I think, for probably that reason. But they're in, so the places that they are right now are in California, which, on the coast, they don't get a lot of snow. Austin, I saw one in Houston a couple weeks ago. Phoenix.
So there could be an autonomous garbage truck,
So
maybe?
there could be an autonomous garbage truck. Look, Caterpillar, I sit on Caterpillar's board of directors, and they have autonomous mining equipment for a lot of their mining customers. And part of the reason is it's hard to hire out in the middle of nowhere, and these mines are out in the middle of nowhere. So we've been talking to Caterpillar about developing autonomous or remotely operated heavy equipment, and we buy a lot of Caterpillar equipment. And then on the collection side of our business, we think there's an opportunity. I've challenged our team to come up with an autonomous residential contract in the next 2 years. And will they do it? I don't know. And I think the way that would kind of manifest itself is that you would have somebody sitting up front, and this wouldn't be a huge contract. This isn't going to be, the city of Seattle. This is going to be probably a homeowners association that has a few hundred homes and that we have a contract with. Ideally, you'd have a truck that is that automated side loader. It recognizes the can coming up. We would certainly initially have somebody sitting up front monitoring things, but the truck would be operating itself. That's my goal, and at least initially, you wouldn't eliminate anybody. You'd still have a person sitting up front, and I think it's probably going to be a while before you eliminate anybody. Although these residential driver positions, they have a pretty high turnover too. So you could get to a point down the road where you truly have an autonomous truck, kind of like a Waymo, where there isn't anybody in the truck. But I think in the near term, I would envision an autonomous residential truck that has somebody up front. So there still is a job there, but it's testing out the autonomy of a heavy truck.
How do you keep people engaged in jobs that most people don't want to do? You've mentioned several cases.
I think part of it is, obviously the obvious part is people want, compensation that is adequate. And so we've raised our compensation for those types of positions over the last 5 years. We've raised it almost 30%. So that's, an average of about 6% per year. So that's well above inflation. But typically that's not the main reason people leave their jobs. Not just those jobs, but any job. People typically leave their job because they're disinterested, or they don't feel valued, or they don't enjoy who they work for. Their boss is a jerk, or whatever. And when you look at these exit interviews, number 12 on the list or 13 on the list is pay. Because if somebody comes to me and says, look, I love what I'm doing here, but this company X is willing to pay me more, I can resolve that. But if you come to me and say, my pay's fine, but my boss is such a jerk, that's a little tougher resolution.
Or the nature of my job is such that my back hurts. That's hard to change too.
Or I just don't feel valued here. I mean, the pay's fine, Jim, but I don't feel like I'm valued. I don't feel like it matters what I do. That is a tougher resolution. So that's why I think pay is something that I can solve that. If you came to me and said you're not feeling adequately compensated, okay, fine, we'll work through that. But if you don't feel valued, that's a little different.
How do you get people to stay then, to Diane's point? How do you get them to love trash, love the industry? Because it must be hard.
Well, part that's when I came into the job in 2016. My goal was to really affect a culture change at the company, and so I kind of have coined the term "people first." And again, I didn't come up with the idea. Really, I think Herb Kelleher was one of the first CEOs to start thinking about this, but I did coin the term "people first" at WM, and I said, look, it's, I want people to feel valued in what they do, regardless of what the job is, whether it's a driver, whether it's a technician, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a sales rep, whatever it is. I want people to feel like that they matter. And by the way, they matter all the way up to Jim. Jim cares about me. He cares about my family. He cares about what I do every day. He genuinely seems like I matter to the organization. And then I think it doesn't really matter whether it's trash or whether it's heavy equipment or whether it's technology, whatever the business is, I think is less important. Some people leave because it's a dirty job. Most people don't leave for that reason. I mean, they get it when they apply for the company. I mean,
they know
you're applying for WM or Waste Management. They know what it is. They leave because of a lot of other things. And I think if they feel valued, then they grow to really, really enjoy the company, and regardless of what line of business we're in.
Well, you've certainly been there 24 years. One question I do have, you're in the business council. One stakeholder we haven't talked about is the regulatory stakeholder, because obviously that has a huge impact on recycling, trash, the nature of what happens, certainly at the municipal level. What are you seeing there? Are you seeing, are we moving as quickly as we need to be on that front?
Well, I always say about regulation that we regulate. Regulation is a good thing for us, and that. Some people say, "Wow, really? That doesn't sound right for you." But regulation is a good thing, I think, and part of that is that we regulate at a higher level than the government. No matter who's in office, we've always regulated ourselves at a higher level than the government would otherwise regulate us. And whether it's at a landfill, whether it's collection of landfill gas, whatever it is. We tend to self-regulate at a higher level. And so I look at it as a differentiator. The more regulation there is, some people, that's tough for them. Some companies have a hard time with regulation.
But are we moving quickly enough on, for example, recycling and some of the climate initiatives around waste? I mean, there's reduce, recycle, reuse, obviously. How are we doing on that front, do you think, as a nation? And, obviously these things are regulated at a local level.
Exactly right. I think they're regulated more at a local level. So whatever happens with the White House doesn't matter as much to us from a regulatory standpoint, because most of our regulation is either local or state. And I would, to answer your question, I think some states do a better job than others.
Who's doing a particularly good job?
When it comes to recycling, I think California does a pretty good job. I wouldn't say California does a great job on all regulation, not necessarily in our business. I think California has their own set of problems. But when it comes to recycling, I think California does a pretty good job. I think the West Coast in particular does a pretty good job. I think Oregon does a good job. I think Washington State does a good job. But look, other states are kind of getting on board as well. I mean, Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas has made it important to them. Dallas, I think a lot of the big cities, less so maybe in some of the rural areas, but I think it's more critical in the big metroplexes. Mm-hmm. So, but I could go down a long list of states that do a pretty good job. I think Florida has done a nice job, and look, there's 50 states, and we're in 48 of them. So. We encourage recycling in each one of these states. So that's why I say there's a bit of us kind of intervening and saying, look, how about adding recycling here? And most of the time, the communities, or whether it's the community, whether it's the municipality, are willing to take that on.
I know we're coming kind of to the end of our time here, Jim, so I have a really weird question for you that I'm just dying to ask you because I'm curious. Okay. What is the
my golf game?
Well, that, but also, what is the most kind of bizarre or surprising thing that WM has ever been asked to process or collect?
There was a boat anchor that came through, like a cruise ship anchor almost. I mean, a huge boat anchor that came through one time that ended up on the floor at one of our recycle centers, and this was a long time ago. And pretty clearly, that's not like an aluminum can or,
how does it get there?
Yeah. Well, it somehow got loaded into the back of a roll-off box, and
Wow.
I don't know how much those things weigh, but clearly the people that saw it said, well, okay, so I don't think I can move. That's not like a 2x4 that I can pull off. It never made its way onto the the belt, but it was on the floor. So there's been a lot of crazy things that have come through recycle plants. But that's the one that kind of comes to mind as being the kind of the craziest.
Is there any question you wish you were asked more often or don't get asked often enough?
I think I wish I was asked more often, particularly by other CEOs, how do I do a better job of taking care of my people? I just think that, well, the environment's very important to me. I go back to that ordering of constituents. And, if you don't take care of your people, then they're not going to take care as well, at least, of your customers, your shareholders, the environment. Mm-hmm. If you really make that a mandate that I'm going to take care of my people, they're going to feel, and I think I've been somewhat successful. I'm never going to be 100% successful in this, but I do think we've made some cultural change at WM, but I wish other leaders would focus on that more. I think in today's world, we don't focus enough on the culture and these jobs. Every job has challenges to it, and all of us are under some form of stress. So if I can take a little bit of that stress away from you in your role and make you feel good about, the alarm clock going off in the morning and coming to work. And some of these folks come to work at pretty insane hours. I mean, they come to work at 2:00 in the morning or 3:00 in the morning. And so if I can make them feel good about the fact that they work for a company that really cares about them and their families, then I think we will have gone a long way to creating a great culture and ultimately a great company. I don't get asked that very often, and that's maybe a question I wish I got asked more.
Thank you so much, Jim. We appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks for having me.